Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ejrnæs, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, Enhancing Digital Trust, ISO IEC 27001, NIS2, and AI Governance. We're excited to discuss this topic and be joined by some of amazing speakers today, Mr. Morten Nielsen and Mr. Alexis Hirschhorn. Before we get started, I'd like to inform the audience that this session is being recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel along with the slides of the presentation. Furthermore, we encourage you to participate by asking your questions. You can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A feature in the chat box. Now, without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to hand it over to our first speaker, Mr. Nielsen.
Thank you for that. As I was just being introduced, my name is Morten Nielsen, and I am the Risk and Security Principal at Globe Team. And I work with, well, information security compliance. They're under NIS2 as well. So yeah, lots of experience with public and private companies that I've helped, especially with NIS2 for the last 2.5 years. So I tend to allude myself to thinking I know something about NIS2, which is why I'm trying to present something and hopefully give you some insights here. Can you switch to my slides, Alexis? Since PCB is a worldwide organization, I thought I'd start up with a short introduction about NIS2. Slide back, why we're getting it and what we're getting. So NIS2, well, that's because we had a NIS1, and most companies haven't heard of it unless they were within the scope, because it came out at the same time as the GDPR, and the GDPR suddenly filled everything for everybody. But it was back in 2016, it was voted on and entered into force in 2018. And it didn't work because it was implemented differently within the different countries, and within countries it was implemented differently in the sectors that were involved. So we were getting in NIS2 now. It started in 2020, and in 2022 it was finalized, and I'm sure many of you, just as me, was watching it live being voted on the European Parliament. Most people aren't that geeky about stuff like that. But it was voted on and it entered into force in December 2022. Well, it was published then and entered into force in January, and now we're working on the national laws being implemented so that the directive works within the national laws. And we're also in the time scale where the companies need to figure out what they're doing about this too. And they have to live up to the requirements of the national laws from October 18th, 2024, unless your country is delaying its implementation, as Denmark is, where I work from. So we're a bit behind most other countries. Would you switch slides, Alexis? The countries need to react on these new requirements, and that means they have to figure out, are they within the scope of the NIS2? Do we have a framework we work from? If we are within scope, if we've selected a framework, then we need to get policies and procedures in place. We need the risk-based approach, risk assessments. Based on that, we need to implement measures, and we need to document everything, because just like the GDPR, this is where you have to document your compliance. So as long as you know what you're doing, implementing security measures and documenting them, then you are, until a supervisory authority says otherwise, compliant. within the scope of NIS2. And I'm assuming that most of the companies that are present as attendees here are somewhere within this. Either they are figuring out if they're within the scope, they have or have not selected a framework, they have some policies, they've made some risk assessments, they've made some they've implemented some measures, and they've documented something. Most would just be uncertain of, are we there yet? Is this enough? And the question and the answer is nobody can tell, but you can document what you're doing, and if you can say that we're doing this because of these risk assessments, then we are very far along if we have all 10 requirements in Article 21 within our scope. Next slide. So what are we getting in this NIS2 directive based on this one? Well, because we need to enhance the cybersecurity of all the companies that provide services to society, to ordinary people, to companies, to government agencies. The world is being more digitized. That means more cyber threats. That means more threat actors looking for vulnerabilities on how to hurting us, how to monetize the weaknesses. And we need all these services to be available. Therefore, we need to protect the digital infrastructure. We need a high common level of cybersecurity. But a bit unlike the GDPR, where the focus was not entirely on confidentiality, also integrity and availability, in NIS2, we have a bit more focus on the availability of services. The availability of these services is where we talk about digital trust. Do we trust companies to be up? We all just experienced how an update to a antivirus program could affect services worldwide. Next, Alexis. And that's where we talk about, well, if the services aren't available when we need them, that's when we lack the trust in them. So we need to make sure that the more important the services are to society, the more or the better or the higher availability they have. Next slide. So, there are lots of sectors in NIS2 compared to NIS1, which only had 7. We now have 18, and you can be within scope of more than one sector. I've highlighted wastewater and drinking water because often, at least in Denmark, it's the same companies that supply these, so they can be within more sectors, and they can potentially have more competent authorities that audit them to check if they are within, if they are compliant. And it's important to figure out what sectors could we potentially be within in the NIS2 scope. Next slide. If you are within a sector, then you need to figure out what networks and systems are within scope. Which of our systems as your company are within scope? This is the Article 6 definition of what networks and systems are. And it's basically everything relating to internet and telecommunication. It's basically everything in hardware. I mean, that be any device or group of interconnected related devices where one of more does programming. Well, that's pretty broad definition, and see all the data used in A and B. Next slide. So if we try to translate it, then if you are a company within one of the sectors, then it's all the systems, all the hardware, all the data, and all your suppliers that you need in order to provide your service. So animation, please. For a drinking water company, it's all the systems and hardware and data and the suppliers that are needed for them to be able to provide drinking water or take away wastewater. But it's not necessarily their HR system, because if it's down, they can still continue to supply you with water. Then potentially if it's down for several months and nobody gets paid, people will quit the company, and then there won't be any water left. So it's the risk-based approach where you need to say, okay, which services, which systems, hardware, data, and suppliers are the most crucial for the the main part of the service that makes us fall within the scope of NIS2. So if you are a food production company, then it's, well, how do we get food in? What systems are used to process the food, package the food, and send out the food? The same for government agencies. What's needed for us to perform our main services that are needed for society? Then everything, we don't have redundant, we don't have unnecessary systems, but we have systems that are less important compared to the main systems, and the risks of these lack of availability here, if that doesn't affect the service that makes us fall in NIS2, then we can take those systems later on. But we need to focus on those that are crucial for us to be able to supply the services that makes us within NIS2. Next slide. So what NIS2 does a bit differently from what you're used to is what risk perspective we're talking about. We've all worked with ISO 27001 for a long time, and it's information security, it's the risk perspective of the organization. What are the risks for us as a company, organization, if we have breaches, if we have risks that affect confidentiality, integrity, availability of our information. 6 years ago, we suddenly had to look into the GDPR, and the perspective switched or added. So we had to talk about or assess what are the risks for the data subjects. Suddenly we're looking at risk for the company, but also of our customers and our employees, because we're processing their personal data. And now NIS2 comes along and says, okay, what are the risks to society? So if we do a service to society and that service falls away, how does that affect society? And here is where it gets hard, because you can have something that is a risk for your company that isn't necessarily a risk for society. But if you have something that is a risk for society, if you switch it off, one back. So if it's a risk for society, if you switch off your service, and you do that because if you don't switch off your service, then you have a risk for your company, then suddenly you have something that is pushing against each other, because it's the risk to society higher than the risk to the company. I used to say the colonial pipeline as an example, where the companies shut off the oil supply because that affected the owners of the colonial pipeline, but suddenly shutting off the pipeline affected states on the other side of the US, because they suddenly didn't have the oil to get fuel for cars. So here's where if the US had a NIS2 would say, well, the risk to society might be higher than the risk to the company, so you might not be allowed to switch off your service because the risks to society outweigh the risks of the company to a certain degree. But you have to have that perspective in, and you have to risk assess what are the risks for towards society if our service is suddenly not available. Next slide.
If you allow me, just Morten, just would like to make a quick, because it's a very interesting slide actually, and this seminar is also about AI. And one thing that for our participants, which is quite interesting, is that nowadays the way we look at risk in AI is exactly the same way. So as you may know, there is a EU AI Act that came out, and also forcing us to look at what are the AI risks for our organization when we are developing AI models for our clients, our users, and data subject if we're using PII, obviously, but as well from the society perspective. So I really do like this slide giving that angle to say, well, yeah, with 27001 we have to look at things inside. If we look at 4201, the standard release for the ISMS, artificial intelligence management system, is exactly the same angle. We have to be much broader in terms of risks.
Yeah. Good input. slide. So where to start with NIS2? Well, from my perspective, my experience, you need to start by picking a framework, and it can be basically be any framework. Most companies will have one, some might not. Just take out the bullets, Alexis, because there are different choices. ISO 27001. You can use NIST Cybersecurity Framework. You can use CIS 18. You can use SOC 2. You can do audit reports. There's even in Denmark, we have something called Sikker Digital, which is technical controls that are mandatory for public authorities. So if you have one already, use that, because don't pick a new framework because there's a new legislation you need to be compliant with. Just map it into the framework you use, but figure out what you want to use, because having a framework to map different requirements in different legislation and different requirements into makes it easier to work with. From my perspective, next slide, what I really prefer and what I always recommend to my clients. Oh yeah, right. I forgot to mention, having a framework is great. Being ISO certified is great. Having the D seal in Denmark, having audit reports, everything is good to show your compliance, but it does not equal compliance. And I really feel like this is a very important point, because I've seen companies say, oh, get our certification and you are NIS2 compliant. And I'm like, yeah, that's the competent authorities that need to figure out if you're compliant. So if people try to sell products and say, now you're compliant if you have our product, then that's not correct, because that's not the way it works. It's always the competent authorities that go out and figure out if they, based on their audit of you, say you're compliant with the rules. But having them is good because it gives you a foundation to work on. In my opinion, that's also because I work mostly with Danish clients. ISO 27001 is the go-to standard. Other places it can be other things, but in Denmark, that's the golden standard. You map up the NIS2 requirements to ISO 27001. You figure out what do we already have, where are our gaps. It can be, for some companies, hard to operationalize the requirements in NIS2, but also in some cases, the controls in ISO 27002. In Denmark, we have an ISAE 3000 NIS2 audit report, where they actually say, okay, the 10 requirements in Article 21, we operationalize to these 105 controls. So there's something I also say to them, you can look at this and say, what do we need based on the audit report? Also, because the audit report is a great way of showing your clients or your vendors how you think they should be compliant. Still, it's still the competent authorities that define compliance, not reports here. There is also the Commission's implementing regulation, and they have actually 3-4 weeks ago sent out for the infrastructure and digital services and managed services, their operationalization of the requirements in Article 21. So you can look into these and say, okay, what does the Commission say? What would the auditors say? What would ISO 27001 say? What do we need to do to say we are compliant with Article 21, Section 1B, which is incident management, as I recall it. So in Denmark, I say ISO 27001 and the auditor statement, ISAE 3000. That will give you the best and most accepted implementation of NIS2 and documentation of the implementation. So next slide. Wow, it's slow in switching. There. This is an example of an ISO 27001 mapping to ISO to NIS2. So we know the ISO controls in 27002. So the access right, well, that's Article 21 to I to H, I to J. So here we look into it and say, okay, if we've implemented ISO 27001 and the controls from 2, and we have access control, that's 518, then we are in some degree compliant with the requirements of these requirements of NIS2. So that's a way of saying what do we have, what do we lack. Next slide. Because the next slide is where I've copied out from the auditor's report, the ISE 3000 NIS2 auditor's report, where they say, okay, well, here is what we say as an auditor you need to have. These are just some of the requirements, because I can't have all 105 in this on this slide. But that's how they operationalize the requirements of Article 21. Next slide. So for me, what you need to do is, this is where I do the, for me, I do a mapping where I say, I have my framework, I have my requirements, I have other requirements. If I do risk assessment with the 3 perspectives, then I can say I am in compliance with ISO, with NIS2, with GDPR. If I classify information, then I fulfill this requirement in ISO 27001 and this in GDPR, maybe not, or maybe this in GDPR. So for me, this is how I structure what we work on, and I use the frameworks just as a way of reporting on my compliance. Next slide. And this could be an Excel sheet. This could be one of 100 different compliance tools. But once you figure out what framework you want and look into the operationalization of the requirements, it's a bit like the statement of applicability in ISO. What requirements are relevant to us, which are not relevant to us? Why are they not relevant to us? But remember to describe why they're not relevant to you, why you've taken them out of your implementation. But it's all about framework for the baseline, and then how do we figure out what exactly does this requirement mean? And on the next slides, do the animation. I've just shown how I've operationalized based on the ISE 3000 and the Commission implementing regulation, and based on my experience. So looking at the time, I'm just going to say, just go through these, because people can just, I'm assuming everybody gets the slides. So this is just different things under just one article, one point in Article 21 on how you need to implement it. Just go through them all. Also the next 2 slides. You're going to get these to look at, so you don't need me to go through them, because everything in 1B is about incident response. And the next slide. That's actually my own experience from my own projects. So what we don't want to do in NIS2 is do the same mistakes as in GDPR. And I can't stress this enough. It won't go away. I remember people saying, but it's GDPR, it'll go away again. It won't be in a year or 2. And no, it didn't go away, and this won't go away. And there will just come more and more regulation from the EU, because this is a digital decade. We're updating all the legislation, setting new requirements. We have the Critical Entity Resilience Act, we have the Cyber Resilience Act, we have the AI Act, we have the Data Act, we have the Data Governance Act. We're getting more and more of these. The Digital Operators Resilience Act. It also won't help if you just stick your head in the sand. And I still get calls from companies to say, GDPR, does that actually apply to us? And I'm like, yes, it did back then. It still does. Just do 2 more animations. And once you've gone past it, it won't go away and you can't ignore it. You need to start figuring out how to address this, because the later you start it, the more pressed for time you'll be, the more panicked you'll be in the actions you take. So start looking into it, figure out your framework, operationalize the requirements, start doing anything you can to get NIS2 implemented in your company and document your compliance. And that's all I had to say. You can write me on that email if you want some of the documentation I have.
Okay, thank you so much, Morten. I'm going to take over from you, and I'm just going to follow up on the NIS2. So just quick introduction about myself. My name is Alexis Hirschhorn. I'm the COO of Abilian Advisors. We're a Swiss-based company, and we provide services on ISO in general implementations, mostly 27001, 22301, 27701, data privacy, business continuity. These are our core business. So we do implementation, we do audits of local and international companies. As you will see, I will talk about one example here in what we do. So we help them to get into compliance. We do as well training, and we do another part which is quite important for NIS2, which is around third-party risk management, which is also a topic I'm going to discuss, to touch here. So yeah, when you look at NIS2, I just have this slide to give us a bit of perspective, you know, of what's around it and what we have to do. And just to give you a bit of context, with my team, we have quite a good experience in implementation. We've done around 80 ISO 27001 implementation, including large deployments. But we recently started a deployment for a company in Europe managing port terminals. Because they're managing port terminals, so, you know, moving containers, of course they need to comply to NIS2 because it's critical. They're critical infrastructure for a country. The thing is, we need to implement 22. We have to do 22 implementation in, actually, if I'm not wrong, 14 different countries. And as you will see, all these countries are not at the same level of maturity. So finding a framework is not something easy when we try to be coherent, of course. And just like Morten told us, 27001 is definitely the way to go. It's exactly what we need to do. So I'm going to share with you our experience on that, where we're struggling, where we found help as well. That hopefully will be also helpful for you if you need to deploy 27001, particularly for NIS2 compliance. Okay, as you can see here in these slides, different topics we need to look at, from, of course, risk analysis, all this element of governance that you know quite well, incident handling, but also some more technical controls that are quite critical to infrastructure. So if you look at where we are today, this is done by our legal and compliance watch team. It's been updated. It's a bit like a month and a half ago. If I'm not wrong, actually, Morten told me, you know, Denmark now is at the draft stage. So you can see where we are in terms of laws. The deadline is 17th of October 2024. This is where countries are supposed to have published their laws, you know. Now, as you can see, we only have 4 countries so far, and the most advanced, in my opinion, is Belgium. And you will see why. They really paved the way. They gave us not only a law that helping, I think, and many other countries are looking at it the way it's been done, but also they gave a framework. So they took 27001, they took NIST, and they built a framework out of it with different levels, only depending on the type of organization you are, the type of infrastructure, your importance, and also they stress the fact that you should identify where do you sit in the supply chain of your country, meaning your critical infrastructure. In my case, I'm talking about port terminals, but we're also working with power supply companies. We're working as well with hospitals, for example, and they need to understand exactly where they are, meaning who do they have as a supplier and who are they supplying to, okay? And this is greatly important in that case. So the Belgian, the CCB actually, as you will see, have released a framework from that. Quickly think, if you're not that familiar with 27001, I just wanted to share with you that 27001, we're looking at the 2022 version, the one with the 93 controls here. And overall, in one way to look at all that we are looking at 27,001. As you can see, we're covering, I would say, most of the aspects of what we need in the NIS2. I like to add a little bit of a touch of 22301 on business continuity, because business continuity in 2701 is really looked at it from the IT continuity perspective and as well security continuity perspective, but not so much from the business aspects. And the interesting part around NIS2 is also to bring the whole continuity of our operation, and in the case I'm referring to about port terminals. So if you're not familiar with it, just a few words with that. Of course, we have tools to operate. Everything usually operates on what we call a plan, do, check, act, right? So making sure we're setting up, understanding our risk, we're establishing policies and objectives on that we're implementing control, the do part, and all this control that you see in that wheel, that we are checking, monitoring what we do through internal audits, external audits, KPIs, and other elements, as well as reaching the act phase where we try to improve, continual improvement, improving continuously what we have implemented, and all that sitting within interested parties. So earlier, I referred to the AIMS, the AI Management System, the 4201, which is a very, very new standard, by the way. It came out. And one of the elements which is quite interesting is like Morten was explaining us, is regarding these different risk perspective and elements that we have. So when we look at it, you can see these interested parties on the sides. We have to look at it that way. So as interested parties, we have, of course, the government giving us this NIS2 where we need to comply to, but also all our clients where we need to comply, our data subjects in the case of GDPR, of course, particularly if we touch PII in our operations. And also we have to look at it from the society perspective, being organizations that need to provide critical services to the country. Okay. Let's be clear, there was a NIS1, Morten talked about it, we got now the NIS2, but the idea and the emphasis that has been put today on cybersecurity element and protecting our infrastructure is based on what we learn. We see what's happening in the world today, the type of attacks that are happening today, including between countries, and we know we have more and more a cyber warfare happening. So protecting our key infrastructure is a crucial element to ensure the resilience of a country. So how do we deploy it practically? And this is where I want to come. One thing, like we said, is to use the ISO 27001, and it's also looking how we can connect and link all these different elements into it. If I start from the right side on the risk management, we have the typical approach to risk, and some of you may recognize what's coming from ISO 31000 or the 27005, which is of course the risk management for cybersecurity and information security. So of course, all the risk management aspects are going to be crucial. And in the case of a port terminal, you'll be quite surprised what we can find. For example, one of the risks that popped out recently, where we were referring to a terminal based in Spain, is that if the entry door is failing, you know, where the trucks come in and are going to pick up containers and drop containers as well, well, if that door is failing, we will have a massive traffic jam, which is going to affect the whole city. And we realized certainly, like, okay, we are using, you know, my team is used to work with cybersecurity risk. We were never thinking, oh, there are other elements like that, of course, a door. And then we started realizing there were plenty of elements in the domain of what we call OT, or operational technology. And I will come to talk a little bit more about that, which are so important for critical infrastructures. So linked to this risk management, of course, yes, please.
I was just, sorry to interrupt. I think that's a very important point to make, because if you work with ISO 27001, you're used to working with IT risks, information, and the CIA triad. But once you work with OT, we're talking different kinds of wording, framework, and standards for operational security. And usually that's been segmented off OT into a different network, and we say, oh, it's air gapped, it can't be moved, we can't access it. but time has shown that we've put our OT closer and closer to the internet, making it much more vulnerable. And that's really, I've heard some very bad stories about how vulnerable OT is. So I think it's really important to make that point.
Yes, I think it all started with the, it was the Cambridge coffee machine. You can remember that, where they decided to put a camera next to the coffee machine. It wasn't the first camera published on the internet where everyone could see. It was fun back in the days. We're talking in the 90s to have the camera on that. And if you take OT as the coffee making process, outside of IT, and how we are sharing information outside, and that led, maybe the story about it, about the Cambridge story. It led actually to leaking classified information, to the internet. Like Morten was saying, there are a few cases, and one other thing which is in the domain of the terminals, or also we see that also with hospitals, that as we have more and more systems connected to the internet, some critical infrastructure, OT infrastructure, could be impacted. Sometimes because of a hack, or of course that's the first thing that comes to mind, but also simply because of poor updates. If you remember CrowdStrike not long ago, but in general, the fact that we are going to affect something in a way that it's not meant to be affected, and I come to that in a couple of slides. You see what I mean by that. So operation security is, of course, all our controls that we will have, our segregation, our firewalling, our access control, all the technical controls and best practices we have. Security awareness is extremely important, and particularly in that field, because security drills are key. We can always give training, we can have people click on boxes, but when we touch the OT domain, when we touch critical infrastructure, being able to quickly respond is essential. So we're talking a different level of training awareness than what we see in IT in general. Incident management is, of course, the link to that. And what is interesting, as we learn as well from our clients, is that they are very good at managing security incident when we see anything happening on the yard, like a container failing or something like that, because lives are at stake, of course, and because we have lives at stake, they are drilled for that and they know what to do. Often they don't know how to manage a cybersecurity incident, and this is where as well the NIS2 is very important, giving us some elements, say how we should manage that, to be able to report it and to deal with it, which means having form of playbooks as well to say how do I handle when I have an incident happening specifically. Business continuity, well, needless to say, it's most critical environment. I was talking about the door at the entrance. Now imagine when we're talking about a crane, which is on a port terminal, which is not moving. A crane costs roughly around 35 million. I was shocked to get into a crane. When you look at a crane, the way it works, there is a whole data center into it. I don't know if you can realize, a proper data center inside the crane itself, just to manage OT. And when you see the precision and how a crane is moving a container and moving it, putting it somewhere else, and it's dropping it, there is 1 centimeter wiggle room for that. So it's extremely precise, because if it doesn't fall right in place, it will stop the whole operation. And everything is very well timed on this terminal. So it's critical to have the system always operating and always working. So the continuity of being able to have the boat offloading equipment and putting it into the yard, and after that moving it to trucks, and trucks moving back the other way around, all that of course is essential. When we talk about hospitals, of course we have life behind that. So to be able to continue to to be able to still provide all the necessary medical needs that are requested is crucial. As some of you remember, there was an accident an incident in France with an hospital that was under attack, and it's very interesting to see, because actually the one that participated, that were there, made a little movie about it. Like a kind of documentary, and the doctors are telling you it's 3 a.m. in the morning, all the systems are down, we don't have access to medical data of patient, we don't know how much morphine has been given to that patient. On that, we don't know anything anymore. It was worse than COVID, they say. So a crisis that lasted for over 24 hours for them. So being able to have all this element is a key part. And then the last one, which is quite close to what we do, the third-party risk management, the supply chain mapping, the supplier monitoring is crucial. We know that these days in organization, Gartner says that around 84% of our business processes are outsourced or heavily relying on third party. This is one crucial element. And over the years, this is where we see most of our clients failing. They really fail to get proper third party risk management. It's quite complex, so we'll talk as well about that. Okay, so I sold you the CCB, the Belgian approach, and they have this framework. You can go and download it. You can go on the Cyphon, CYFUN, look at CCB. You can download it online. It's on Excel. They made a list of control. They made the mapping with the NIS. They made the mapping with 27001, and of course the NIS2, because it's made to answer the NIS2. And hear me well here. The Belgians say that you will comply if you apply 2701, you will mostly comply to it. But they gave you a bit more detail. If you know these ISO 27001 controls, you know that in some of them there is a room for you to put the baseline where you want. Like for example, if we talk about access review, they don't tell you how often you need to do an access review. They tell you it's based on risk. And the good thing here in the CCB is based on the type of organization you are. As you can see, small, basis, important, essential, and they tell you how to do it. They will say exactly what level, how often, for example, you need to do access review. As simple as that, okay? So they made a really comprehensive framework, really helpful, and I believe many countries are going to use the same model to move on, to help organizations to assess their level. That's one thing, also to help them to become compliant to NIS2. So talking about OT, there is one standard which is at the heart of it. So the 62443, sorry. And more particularly, there is one on the system that we are interested in, the 3.3. And that one is going to add several elements of OT that may be relevant in your organization. So if you have OT in your organization, which many companies that are, linked and concerned by NIS2 will have, this is really a standard I would strongly recommend you to have a look at it. What we did at Abilene with the team is that we created an SOA, a statement of applicability, or list of all control, which is 27001 plus selected control from 62443 that help us and that we adjust depending on the type of organization we're implementing in, that give us a full statement of applicability, a full list of controls that we can use for that. Okay. So one thing to get us clear about the difference between IT security and OT security, or industrial, if you want security on it, as you can see, is that in OT world, availability is the key. And you can look on the slide. This is a slide I stole from Siemens because they did a great slide on that. And as you can see, the first thing is the asset life cycle. While you change your laptops, every 3 years, and that's perfectly fine. You can see that the crane is going to last for around 30 years. So we're not talking about the same type of asset life cycle, obviously. So the risks are quite different. The software life cycle is also very different here. Meaning we're going to use it as much as we can, as much as with spare parts, but also updating, patching, if you want, a crane is not as simple. It's like when we patch systems that are linked to patients in an hospital. You cannot patch it like this. If there is a life behind it, it's a completely different ballgame, of course. The possibility that we can, adjust the level of security on it is quite complicated. One of the things which is to that is, as you can see, is a type of operating system that are used. Again, in terminals, I've seen systems running Windows 95, but also I've seen that running in hospitals. And I'm talking Windows 95 systems connected to the internet as well, where you have a patient live behind. I want to ask them, what do you do with that? Say, we don't know. We don't know how to patch it. We don't know how to replace it. We're waiting for the vendor to do it. and it is large issue. So that there is other way to mitigate this risk, of course, like segregation, form of monitoring, and so on. But still, it's really a different perspective to have. And also the way we protect things, the way they look at things is, and I like this sentence, because this sentence, I believe, will give you the whole idea behind it, right? Is human lives and disaster cannot be restored from backups. So the whole approach you have on risk is completely different on that, and the way you protect these elements are there. So it's extremely challenging. It's extremely challenging to take a standard like 27001 and to use it directly on OT, because as you can see, we have different perspective. At the same time, there are IT systems, so the technicality of it is quite similar. And if you look at it and how the 64434 is showing it to us, they show, well, yes, you have your IT, you're going to have all your cloud environments that are coming there, that are in these elements, of course, and we're going to have to layer it. Like Morten said, you know, there is a segregation on it, and because there is a need. The thing is that segregation is less and less present, just like we see segregation in the clouds to be less and less present between our infrastructure and the cloud. So the whole game here is to manage to say there are risks, there is a cycle that exists in IT, and there is another cycle in OT, and yes, they are connected to some extent. But like I said, we see more and more systems, like imagine the system to manage containers and boats, you know. There is, of course, an IT system where, you know, they're booking the boats, they're planning everything, a bit like planes management or trains, all these kind of things. But this system has to interact with the cranes and the OT at the same time. So there is a link that must exist. And this is where we are really struggling on that. So just wanted to give you a little bit of perspective of what is OT in that case, and how it is critical to look at it, to look at the cybersecurity element of it slightly differently from what we look from the IT one. A quick word on third-party risk management. Like I said, it's one of the most critical control, because, and I like the way the Belgian put it, saying like, show where you are in the supply chain, show what you are. So making sure you have key elements to be able to manage your suppliers, understanding the level of criticality of your suppliers, understanding how your suppliers are doing, and you know what? Sometimes the supplier of your supplier is also critical for it, you know. So you don't want to only make sure that your data center provider is doing great. You want to know who is providing them their services that they need to operate for you, okay? You want to make sure that they also understand the level of compliance that they need to provide. And also they want to demonstrate, they should be able to demonstrate to you their operational resilience, which is of course critical. So monitoring that, reviewing that, I know it's time consuming, I know it's complex, and this is also why we have the approach of supplier shield that we use at Abilene. It's one of the critical elements of NIS2 and 27001 anyway. So I'm conscious of time. I'm just going to give you 2-3 minutes, because you know the topic today is including AI, and you will somehow wonder why we have like NIS2, 27001 and AI. The thing is, AI is an extremely complex challenge at this stage. I was recently in the UAE, and I was giving a training to one of the leading company in the world on AI, on G42. So I was training people around ISMS, the PCB course on 4201, which is a great course, by the way. One of the key elements that come in the public, I had engineers, I had lawyers, I had people in governance, you know, I had quite a large crowd actually. And what was very interesting is getting them to get that perspective of what are our risks now that we have AI, because AI is embedding itself into our daily lives in a good or sometimes bad way. You know, we'll leave it up to you to judge if you like to receive emails written by ChatGPT or not. Personally, I don't like it. So we have the LLM perspective that we know, but we have also what we call narrow AIs or weak AIs, which are specialized in some domain and doing a great job, but that are raising new kinds of risks. And while we will need to comply with NIS2, we need also to look at, well, we are using AI for some systems. We are using AI to take decisions on some elements. And let's be clear, it's already the case for any company. Are we sure of the quality of what's being put out from this AI today? Are we sure there are no biases, there are no errors? How this could potentially affect our capability, our resilience, capability to continue our activities? These are very, very complex challenges, to be honest. Just to give you some numbers, IBM says that 80% of the projects, AI projects today, are dropped. So companies start a project, work on it, and they drop it. And you know why? Because the results are not here, because there is a lot of bias, because there is a lot of mistakes, okay? And this also means that some of them go through it and they are in an acceptable level, but until what extent? So we could do a whole webinar, and certainly there will be other webinars, I think, coming up on AI risk and AI challenges today. My point on that is to keep in mind that while we have more and more AI embedding in ourselves, understanding the risks linked to that, whether you are a user, the company is a user, or you are a provider somehow, or you are in between, you are creating some elements based on what kind of AI services you can have, particularly for your critical infrastructure, is essential to understand this risk and to follow up on these risks. Yeah, so here you have my, I think this, yes, is to scan. If you want to go on my LinkedIn, feel free to add me to it. I would be happy to talk to you if you need to. And I'm going to pass the microphone to Ejrnæs, please, on questions.
Thank you, both Mr. Nielsen and Mr. Ejrnæs for delivering this highly informative webinar. We have been receiving a lot of emails, and unfortunately, we will not have the time to address them all. But without further ado, we'll take some time to address a few questions. Let's begin with the first one. What is the major difference between NIS2 and DORA?
Can I take that one? First of all, DORA is for the financial sector and NIS2 is for basically everything else. But if you look into the requirements, DORA has more requirements regarding third-party risks, vendor risks, redundancy, having extra suppliers, extra data centers. So it has a much harder focus on this. There's also 2 levels in DORA where you can be on the big scale or the small scale. So, but mostly it's about if you're in NIS2, you're probably not in DORA, and if you're in DORA, you're probably not in NIS2. There's a slight overlap about some market infrastructures within the financial market, but DORA is NIS2 with more requirements regarding vendors and redundancies. I hope you agree, Alexis.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better, so.
Thank you. Another question asks, in how many EU countries has the NIS2 directive been transposed?
Yes, like you've seen on the slide I shared, we have 4 countries to date so far. Most of the countries are very late, not even started it actually. And it's somewhat worrying, you know. So we don't know what the EU will do about that. Like I said, the deadline is October 17th, and or is it 18th? I'm confused now, but anyway, mid-October. So yeah, 4 countries so far. It's moving slowly in some countries for such. For certain have not started at all. Some others have just have a drafted law now. So yeah, we'll see.
Thank you. Another question is, does compliance with ISO IEC 27001 mean compliance with NIS2 directive, or is it an important step to comply?
ISO 27001 certification does not automatically imply make you compliant with NIS2, but it's a very good framework and it's a very good place to start.
Yes, you have to see with every country, because one thing we're monitoring is the countries have the choice to make NIS2 harder, to add their own elements on it. And like the Belgians said, well, use 27001, this is your best reference, but we also want you to have a look at our controls and this element. So you will have to see in your own country what is the law. You can be sure that you will cover, I would say, a good 99% of the requirements of NIS2 with 27001. If you apply it properly, I would put it this way, but it may not be enough depending on the type of business you're in and depending on your country and their requirements.
Thank you. Another question is, how does compliance with ISO IEC 27001, NIS guidelines, and AI governance principles align with regulatory requirements and help organizations demonstrate commitment to data security and trust?
Yeah, this is, if you allow me, Morten, on that, it's an important question. The thing is, I'm a certification auditor since 2007, and I've seen a lot of organization, and I've seen a lot of companies being certified and honestly not being at the level of security you will expect. Okay, what we see now is we see certification bodies and actually the accreditation bodies, which are on top of certification body, becoming tougher and tougher and looking at what the certification body do. Because one thing is to be certified and you can obtain a piece of paper. And in Supplier Shield, we look at a lot of suppliers receive, and some of them coming with fake certificates, or not that they're faking it, they are in good faith thinking that the certificate that was given to us was the proper certificate, properly accredited, but it's not. So it's always a good thing towards your clients to say, we are, look what we're doing, we're doing ISO 27001, we're doing SOC 2, type 2, for example. We have implemented CIS 18 controls or NIST controls, whatever you fit as a framework. But like Morten said very well, it's up to the country itself that will decide whether this is enough or not, okay? And if there is a framework provided like the CCB provides for Belgians, then you have an element to see, are we there or not, regardless of the certification.
Okay, and last question. In what ways can AI governance frameworks help government agencies build and maintain digital trust while leveraging artificial intelligence and technologies?
Morten, you want to?
Yeah, I think if you want to build digital trust and use AI, then you really have to be transparent about how you do it, what you do it, because there's nothing worse than knowing something happens and not understanding it. It's really about being transparent about what data is being used, how it's being used, to what effect, what's the end purpose, what are the algorithms. So digital trust comes from transparency when it comes to building this, especially for government agencies where digital trust is basically a currency, because citizens won't use government digital services if they don't trust the government. So transparency is key to this, more so than most public agencies would like, probably.
Yeah, it's a very good point. It's all about transparency. It's all about accountability as well. And the EU AI Act is extremely clear on that, what you need to demonstrate. Now, it's today an act, which means it will become like the GDPR at some point, okay? But we're not there yet. So we will see how countries will work on that. But remember, there is a whole, I would say, hype regarding LLMs and AI, because LLM made AI public to everyone. But remember one thing, an LLM, one of the best LLM is the amount of data an LLM has. Just to give you an idea, and this was coming from Jan LeCun, which is the head of AI at Meta, it's 10 to a 13th bytes of data is inside an LLM, roughly. You know what they've put in Llama, for example, or in ChatGPT 4.0. If you get the difference with a human being, a 5-year-old child has 10 to the 15th bytes. Okay, so we're talking a 1 with 15 0 of bytes of data. So we have much more knowledge than any LLM. Of course, these AI systems are great for recovering text elements, but us as human beings, we collect data from plenty of different sources. We read, we listen, we feel, we see. There are plenty of different elements. So we are really at the beginning of AI. Using it too fast is extremely dangerous. And to build digital trust, we need to keep in mind that they are not that intelligent per se. They are good to do something very, very specific and specialized. Okay, but I believe we still have a long way to go until we can build a complete digital trust using AI. And this is where the EU is going, saying, okay, be careful, be transparent, be accountable on what you do, demonstrate how you calculate, show us the data that you use to build your data sets, because it's essential. And you can see how today OpenAI is being sued by different companies on that because of the lack of transparency regarding the data sets. So we still have a long way to go on that.
Thank you both, Morten and Alexis. Please be informed that this session is being recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel alongside with the slides of the presentation. And additionally, we apologize for not having the time to address the rest of the questions, but we will answer their questions on our next issue of PCB Magazine. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.